the Auto Pivot Lines indicator, which is offered for various platforms on the TradingFinder website. From this section, you can download the indicator file for MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5 platforms and run it on your chart. Additionally, traders can read this page to learn about the functionality and operation of the indicator. From the Navigator section, we select the indicator file and run the indicator by dragging the file onto the chart. Once the indicator is placed on the chart, it begins to identify and draw pivot lines for 3 different periods on the price chart. The Auto Pivot Line indicator uses the identifier of the last 20 highs and lows to connect each of the highs and lows together one by one. And if it can find a trend where at least 3 pivots are aligned, it then connects the lines together and displays them as pivot lines on the chart. For example, here the first pivot, the second pivot, and the third pivot were aligned, and after that the lines were drawn. The maximum number of lines that can be displayed in each period is 4, and here we can see 4 lines for the short-term period, which are shown in red. The first line, the second, the third, and the fourth. The short-term period is drawn for us in red. The medium-term periods are displayed in aqua, and the long-term period is shown in blue and drawn on the chart. Also, a specific range has been considered for drawing the lines. And if the pivot points are within this range of lines, they are considered as confirmation, and there is no need for the line to intersect the point exactly. In other words, if the pivot points are within this price range, they are identified as confirmation. This range is determined based on 1/10 of the ATR above the main line and 1/10 of the ATR below the main line. Also, when the lines are drawn, they are displayed as solid lines from the first pivot to the last pivot, and after that, the line continues on the chart as a dashed line, extending further as needed. Here, you can clearly see the different lines. In the Settings section, under the Input tab, there are several different options available, where you can choose between 2 distinct types of settings. These particular settings are for 3 distinct periods: long-term, medium-term, and short-term. In the first section, there are settings related to the zigzag lines, where you can enable or disable the display of zigzag lines. By default, this option is disabled, and the lines are not shown. In the next section, we can select the period for drawing zigzag lines for the pivots. By default, for the long term, it is set to 36, but we can increase or decrease these values as needed. The higher these values are, the more long-term pivots will be identified, and the lower these values are, the more short-term pivots will be identified, and the lines will be drawn accordingly. In the next section, we can choose the style for drawing the zigzag lines, which can be selected from 5 options: solid, dash, dot, dash dot, and dash dot dot. In the next section, we can choose the color of the zigzag lines as desired. We can also change the thickness of the zigzag lines. In the second section, for each period, you can also enable or disable the display of the pivot lines, and the rest of the options work in exactly the same way. You can choose whether to show or hide the medium-term zigzag lines, set the period for the medium-term zigzag lines, as well as select the style, color, and finally the thickness of the medium-term lines. And in the next section, you can also enable or disable the display of the medium-term lines. In the final section, you can choose whether to show or hide the short-term zigzag lines, as well as set the period, style type, color, and thickness. And in the following section, you can enable or disable the display of the short-term pivot lines as well. Here, I am enabling the long-term zigzag. Now you can see the long-term zigzag lines here. Alright friends, we've reached the end of this indicator tutorial. We would be happy if you share your comments and suggestions with us in the comments section.